Chapter 101. What did we teach Beijing, you ask? We taught them a police state doesn't work. They thought it could, and they tried for 50 years to bring Hong Kong to heel, using every tool that came along, buying people, using CCTV cameras and facial recognition, propaganda, phalanxes of police and army, drone surveillance, drone strikes, and all of that just made the people of Hong Kong more resolute to keep what we had. Why do you say that? Of course what we had was real, because hegemony is real. That's a feeling, and feelings are something your culture explains to you. We in Hong Kong have a very particular culture and feeling. We lived as servants of the British, and we know very well what it felt like to be subaltern to a hegemonic power. That only lasted a few generations, but it set a particular feeling here, right in people's hearts. Never again. So when the British turned us over to Beijing, fine. We are Chinese, Beijing is Chinese. But we are also Hong Kong. It creates a kind of dual loyalty. Part of that is we speak Cantonese while Beijing speaks Putonghua, Mandarin to some Westerners, although that's actually an elite or written version of Putonghua. But never mind, we were different. We speak Cantonese, we are Hong Kong. Yes, of course there were Hong Kong people in favor of joining Beijing completely. These people often got money from Beijing, but I'm sure it was a genuine feeling for some of them. But most of us were for one country, two systems, just as the saying had it. Our system. Many of us call it rule of law. Laws in Hong Kong were written and passed by the legislature, enforced by the police, and ruled on by the courts. That's why the world trusted us with their money. Beijing didn't have that. They only had the party. What got decided behind the closed doors of their standing committee became their equivalent of the law, but it was a rule-only rule without law, and it couldn't be challenged. It was arbitrary. That's why when Beijing tried to build Shanghai as their own finance center to counter us, it didn't work. The world didn't trust Shanghai the way they trusted Hong Kong. So we in Hong Kong fought for it. We fought for the rule of law. All through the years between 1997 and 2047 we fought. Why 2047? The deal was that on July 1st, 2047, we were to be folded entirely into the Republic of China. That was the British kicking the can down the road. They were not the worst empire by any means, but they were definitely an empire, and all empires are bad. So they struck that deal with Beijing, which had it that for 50 years we were to be one country, two systems. And during those 50 years we in Hong Kong got used to fighting for our rights. Part of that meant going out into the streets and demonstrating. Over the years we saw what worked and refined our methods. Violence didn't work. Numbers did. That's the secret, in case you were looking for the secret to resisting an imperial power, which was what we were doing through those years. Nonviolent resistance of the total population, or as much of it as you can get. That's what works. Yes, of course Beijing could have crushed us. They could have killed every person in Hong Kong and repopulate the city with people from mainland China who didn't know any better and would have been happy to take over such a nice infrastructure. Not that they would have known how to operate it. Still, this joke that a Western acquaintance once told me about the government dismissing the people and electing another one, that was no joke to us. Because Beijing could have done that. It's kind of what they did to Tibet. But there were constraints on Beijing too. For one thing, they were always trying to entice Taiwan back into the fold. One part of that effort was to say to Taiwan, "You'll be fine if you join us. We'll treat you just like we treat Hong Kong. One country, two systems, and if you come back to us, three systems. Let 100 flowers bloom." But that argument would only work if they were indeed treating Hong Kong well. Yes, there were other reasons that weren't so convincing to Taiwan, of course. There are always multiple causes, always. In this case, there was always June 4th, Tiananmen Square, 1989. Now known also as May 35th or April 66, or all the way around the calendar. Although the joke gets old, and even hard to calculate, and besides every one of those dates is now blocked on the mainland internet, of course. Because Beijing wants to erase that day from history. And though it seems like that can't really happen, in fact it is more possible than you might think. At least on the mainland. The world remembers it for China, and Beijing definitely did not want another such incident in the 21st century, when the whole thing would have been recorded by every phone and broadcast worldwide. No. Murdering the citizens of Hong Kong was not an option. Sure, The billions occupation of Beijing helped us. No doubt about it. That was huge, and of course part of why that happened was that the mainland's illegal internal migrant population saw how we did it in Hong Kong and decided to do it themselves, right in Beijing. And of course the party was terrified. How could they not be? The people without proper hukou, without residency papers for where they lived, did all the dirty work in China, and there were about 400 million of them when the occupation happened. That's a lot of people without any feeling of representation or belonging. So yes, the party had to deal with that or lose everything. In that struggle, Hong Kong became a smaller matter and had some wiggle room, you might say, which we used very smartly. It was never about independence, you must understand that. It was only for one country, two systems. For the rule of law that we had here to persist past 2047. Yes, of course Beijing had other big problems. And as I said, they couldn't just kill us off. That left only talk, the discursive battle. And happily, we people of Hong Kong recognized this and banded together. Solidarity, there's no feeling like it. People talk about it, they use the word, they write about it, they try to invoke it. Naturally. But to really feel it, you have to be part of a wave in history. You can't get it just by wanting it, you can't call for it and make it come. You can't choose it, it chooses you. It arrives like a wave picking you up. It's a feeling. How can I say it? It's as if everyone in your city becomes a family member, known to you as such even when you have never seen their face before and never will again. Mass action, yes, but the mass is suddenly family. They are all on the same side, doing something important. How did that play out in reality? What didn't you see? Have you forgotten? We took to the streets every Saturday for 30 straight years. Of course, sometimes it was more intense, and other times less so. Often we let the young people do it. The idealism of youth is very good at persisting in such things. Young people want something to believe in, of course. Everyone does, but the young aren't yet used to not getting it, so they persist. And they can handle the physical stresses of it better. But whenever push came to shove, we older people would come back out onto the streets also. As July 1st drew ever closer, we got back out onto the streets such that on some Saturdays the entire population of Hong Kong was out there. Yes, there were other things we had to do also. Of course. These were not so exciting. In fact, they were often tedious, but they needed to be done. Eventually you have to recognize that many necessary things are boring, but also quite a few things are both boring and interesting at the same time. So we went to meetings, we joined the neighborhood councils, we went to the HK legislature, and did all the things that being part of a citizenry requires. It wasn't just the demonstrations, although that was part of it. There was all kinds of work to be done, and we did it. You have to pace yourself for the long haul. No, they didn't give it to us. Don't put it that way. Your questions are kind of offensive. I'm not sure if you are aware of that or not, but whatever, I will answer you politely because I know the difference. So, eventually what I think happened is we just wore them down. They couldn't beat us. They had not the hegemony to do that. In fact, now some people say we beat them. These are the tail wags dog people who think our sterling example will eventually transform all mainland China into one big Hong Kong. No, I myself don't think that's right. It goes too far. China is too big, and the party elites are too convinced they are right. I'm more in the camp that gets called tail wags dogs, but this is more realistic, even to the image itself. When a dog wags its tail, even when it is most excited, it's only the butt that also moves with the tail, not the whole dog. That wouldn't make sense, just in the physical sense. You can see that when you look at any dog, even one in a frenzy of happiness. Only the butt wags with the tail. The head and chest stay steady. So, it's the same with China. The Cantonese-speaking part of China is in the south. It's Guangdong, a very big and prosperous province in South China, centered on the city Guangzhou, used to be spelled Canton in English, and there are 100 million of US who speak Cantonese, and it's an older dialect than Mandarin. And most of the Chinese who live elsewhere in the world speak it, and we in Hong Kong speak it. Also in Shenzhen, the special economic zone where Beijing tried to piggyback on Hong Kong's success in the world. So Beijing made a big mistake when they tried to suppress Cantonese as a language, which they did for many years, because that meant all of Guangdong didn't believe in Beijing either. They were more with Hong Kong than with Beijing, even if they never did much to show it. But language is family. Language is the real family. What has been the upshot? Well, it's a work in progress, but since you ask so politely, I will say that since July 1st, having agreed to keep one country, two systems in Hong Kong, Beijing also has had to grant more and more rights to Guangdong. And they definitely don't mess with the Cantonese language anymore. Of course, they said this change of policy was made just to integrate South China better into the country at large, but really it was done to turn what had been a defeat into a victory, or at least put it to use, which Beijing, it has to be said, is very good at doing. They crossed the river by feeling the stones. Still, in this case, the tail wagged so vigorously that it wagged the dogs, but two, that I will grant. You can see how that works just by telling your dog it's time to leave the apartment and go for a run. Chapter 102. Meeting in San Francisco over. Retired in full, Mary considered how... Chapter 102. Meeting in San Francisco over. Retired in full, Mary considered how best to get home to Zurich. There was no hurry. She looked into it online, and to her surprise found that Arthur Nolan, the airship pilot Frank had introduced to her in his co-op, was flying into San Francisco the following week as part of a voyage around the world. This tour of his was headed to the Arctic, then down over Europe and the east side of Africa to Antarctica. Mary contacted him and asked if she could join the trip, and he texted back and said yes, of course. Happy to have her. On the airship, they called him Captain Art. He met her on a pad on the side of Mount Tamalpais where his craft was tied to a mast, and ushered her up the jetway and along to the craft's viewing chamber, which was located at the bow of the airship's living quarters, a long gallery that extended under much of the length of the airship's body, like a big keel. The gondola, they called it. A little group of passengers were already in this clear-walled and clear-floored room, eating appetizers and chatting. Nature cruise. Mary tried to keep an open mind about that, tried to remember names as she was introduced. About a dozen people, mostly Scandinavian. At the end of the introductions, Captain Art told them they would stop next in a particular Sierra meadow to see a wolverine that had been spotted, an animal he obviously considered special. They were happy to hear it. Shortly thereafter they took off. This felt strange, lofting up over the bay, bouncing a little on the wind, not like a jet, not like a helicopter. Strange but interesting. Dynamic lift. The electric motors, on sidecars up the sides of the bag, could get them to about 200 kilometers an hour over the land, depending on the winds. East over the bay, and that part of the city. Then the Delta. It reminded Mary of the model of Northern California that she had been shown long ago, but this time it was real and vast. The Delta, an endless Tule marsh below them, cut into patterns by lines of salt-tolerant trees, remnants of the old islands and channels. Blonde-tipped green grasses, lines of trees, open water channels, the V-wakes of a pair of animals swimming along. Beavers, Art told them. The viewing chamber had spotting scopes, and what they showed when one looked through them was that the Delta was dense with wildlife. Mostly unvisited by humans now, they were told. Part of California's contribution to the Half-Earth Project. Mount Diablo, rising behind them to the southwest, gave them a sense of the size of the Delta. It was immense. They could still just see the Farallones marking the sea on the western horizon. To the north stood the little black bump of Mount Shasta. To the south the coastal range walled the Central Valley on the right, the Sierra Nevada walled it on the left. Huge expanse of land. It looked like California would have an easy time meeting the half-Earth goal. Over the Central Valley, habitat corridors looked like wide hedgerows, separating giant rectangles of crops and orchards. A green and yellow checkerboard. Farther east hills erupted out of orchards, the first rise to the Sierra. Now a dark wall ahead. The airship rose with the land, floating over wild oak forests and then evergreen forests, with steep-sided canyons etched deeply through the hills. Snow ahead on the highest peaks. Art brought the airship down onto Tuolumne Meadows, a high expanse of snow and trees, punctuated by clean granite domes. The roads to it were still closed. They seemed to have it entirely to themselves. Along with a family of wolverines. The airship attached itself to a mast sticking out of the snow near Lambert Dome. The two members of the crew maneuvered the craft down and secured it to anchor bollards. A ramp extended from a door in the side of the gondola, and they walked down into chill, still air, onto hard white snow. What do they eat in winter? The passengers asked Art, looking around at the white folds of snow, the steep granite faces. No obvious signs of food, unless you could eat pine trees. Did they hibernate? They did not. They were fine in winter, Art told them. Dense fur, feet like snowshoes. In winter they ate little mammals dug up from under the snow, but mainly bigger creatures found dead. Carrion eaters. Not uncommon in winter to find creatures that had died. They followed him over the hard snow. He was looking at his phone as he walked, his other hand balancing a spotting scope on a monopole over his shoulder. Then he stopped, phone extended to point. They all froze. From a knot of trees emerged 3 black creatures, galumping over the snow. They looked somewhat like dogs with very short legs. A mama and 2 kits, it appeared. Broad backs, reddish-black fur. Bands of lighter fur around the sides of their bodies. The mother had a buff band across her forehead. She stopped and suddenly began digging hard in the snow. Not far beyond them, a steaming hot springs had melted an open patch of ground, muddy and crusted at the edge, with brown ice. Possibly a water hole in wintertime. Then the mama wolverine stuck her head in the hole she had dug and began to tug upward. A dead deer, buried under the snow near the spring. Patiently, with some more pawing and many hard tugs, the mother pulled it up out of the snow. Serious strength in that small body. She began to tear at the corpse, and her kits flopped around her trying to do the same. One old name for the wolverine, Art said quietly as they watched, was the glutton. They always ate with great enthusiasm, it seemed, and usually tore their prey to bits and ate every part of it, including bones. They had a tooth at the back of their mouths that made it easier for them to tear flesh, and their jaws were so strong they could break any bone they came on. Gullo Gullo was their Latin name, referencing this supposed gluttony. We're lucky to see this, Art said quietly. Wolverines are still rare here. There weren't any at all in the Sierra from about 1940 to the early 2000s. Then a few began to show up on night cameras near Lake Tahoe, but they were wanderers, and it didn't look like there were any breeding pairs. Now they're being seen all up and down the range. There were some reintroductions to help that along. Now it seems like they're back. Lots of deer up here? Mary guessed. Sure. Like everywhere. Although at least here the deer have some predators. Mountain lions, coyotes. They settled in and shared time at the spotting scope. They watched the wolverine family eat. It was a somewhat grisly business. The kits were playful in the usual style of youngsters. This was their first year, Art said. Next year the mom would shoo them off. They weren't graceful, being so low and foursquare. They reminded Mary of otters she had seen in zoos, the way otters moved on land. But otters were very graceful underwater. For wolverines, this was it. Not graceful. But of course this was a human perspective. They were also obviously capable, confident, happy on the snow. Unafraid. Wild creatures at home, back at home, after a century gone. Knitting up the world. Mary moved away, stood watching. For a time she was distracted, thinking of Frank and the chamois and marmots. Then these animals brought her back. The kits harassed their mom, played in the usual style of the young. Such a deep part of what mammals were playing when young. Did baby salamanders play? She couldn't remember ever playing. Her childhood was so far behind her. But no, there it was, she remembered. Kicking a ball in the yard and so on. Sure. Then also the careless tolerance of the mom, ignoring her youngsters as they clambered on her, wrestled with each other, fell over themselves. They snuffed and worried at her underside. She knocked them away with a flick of her foreleg. They did have big feet, clawed pads like snowshoes, broad and long. Lords of winter. Nothing up here could harm them. Nothing scared them. Art said people had seen them chasing away bears, mountain lions, wolves. Masters of all they surveyed. Captain Art regarded them with a fixation Mary found pleasing. He was lost in it. They were in no hurry. This was the place to be. Again she thought of Frank in the meadow above Flim's, but now it was all right. She could be grateful he had taken her up there, that he had introduced her to this man. It was getting cold. She felt the first pinch of hunger. She had to pee. But there before her, wolverines. It was a blessing. Only when the sun dropped into the treetops did Art stir and lead them back to the airship. By then they were really cold, and warming up in the gondola was a kind of party. They flew east on the wind, looking down at the pink alpenglow suffusing the range of light. North and east above desert, the Rockies, flat prairie, and then tundra. The border between the Great Boreal Forest and the tundra looked ramshackle and weird. A lot of permafrost here had melted, Art said, creating what was called a drunken forest, trees tilted this way and that. Then lakes everywhere under them, more lakes than land. Flying over this huge, wet expanse, it looked like the half-Earth goal would be easy to reach, or was even already accomplished. Which was not the case, but one always judged by what stood before one's eyes. In fact, they infested the planet like locusts. No, that too was wrong. In the cities it looked like that, but not here. There were many realities on a planet this big. The new port city on the Arctic Ocean, called Mackenzie Prime, looked like an old industrial site. A single dock 6 kilometers long, studded with cranes for handling container ships. The opening up of the Arctic Ocean to ships had made for one of the odd zones of the Anthropocene. Traffic was mostly container ships refurbished as autopilot solar-powered freighters, slow but steady. Carbon-neutral transport on a great circle route, and as such not much to complain about. Also, there were few to complain, at least in terms of locals. The total population on the coasts of the Arctic Ocean still numbered less than 1 million people. Inuit, Sami, Athapascan, Inupiat, Yakut, Russian, American, Canadian, Scandinavian. The great shock of their arrival was to see that the ocean, clear of ice to the northern horizon, was yellow. Naturally, this looked awful, like some vast toxic spill. In fact, it was geoengineering, no doubt the most visible act of geoengineering ever, and as such widely reviled. But the solar heating of the Arctic Ocean when there was no ice covering it might be enough all by itself to tip the world irrevocably into Jungle Planet. All the models were in agreement on this, so the decision to try to forestall that result had been made according to Paris Agreement protocols, and the color dye released. Yellow water didn't allow sunlight to penetrate it, and even bounced some sunlight back into space. Relatively small quantities of dye could color a large area of ocean. Both the artificial and natural dyes they were using broke down over a summer season, and could be renewed or not the following year. Petroleum-based dyes were cheap to manufacture, and only mildly carcinogenic. Natural dyes, made of oak and mulberry bark, were non-petroleum-based and only a little bit poisonous. The two could be alternated as they learned more about them. The energy and heat savings in terms of albedo were huge. The albedo went from 0.06 for open water, where 1 was total reflection and 0 total absorption, to 0.47 for yellow water. The amount of energy thus bounced back out into space was simply stupendous, the benefit-to-cost ratio off the charts. Geoengineering?
Yes.
Ugly? Very much so. Dangerous?
Possibly.
Necessary?
Yes.
Or put it this way, the international community had decided through their international treaty system to do it. Yet another intervention, yet another experiment in managing the Earth system, in finessing Gaia. Geo-begging. Mary looked down at the ungodly sight from the airship's gondola and sighed. It was a funny world. Why did you bring us up here? She asked Art. Was it to see this? He shook his head, looking mildly shocked at the suggestion.
For the animals, he said.
As always. And a few hours later they were flying over a herd of caribou that covered the tundra from horizon to horizon. Art admitted he had brought the airship down to the right altitude to create this effect. They were about 500 feet above the ground. From this height, there seemed to be millions of animals, covering the whole world. These were migrating west, in loose lines like banners or ribbons, which bunched whenever they were crossing a stream. It was stunning to see. South over Greenland. As they flew, they saw a lot of other airships. Giant robot freighters, circular sky villages under rings of balloons, actual clippers of the clouds sporting sails or pulled by kites, hot air balloons in their usual rainbow array. There had not yet been any regularization of shapes and sizes. Art said they were still in the Cambrian explosion moment of airship design. Many people were moving up into the sky, and traffic lanes and altitudes had been established, as with jets in the old days. Airspace was humanized and therefore also bureaucratized. And carbon neutral. As they flew, Mary spent more and more time listening to Art talk to his passengers, his clients or guests or customers. He had lived most of his life on this airship, he told them. He was about 60, Mary reckoned, so the most of his life seemed a bit premature, a statement of intent as much as a history. She liked him. A slight man, angular face, hooked nose, balding. Startling pale eyes, a distinguished look, a sweet, shy smile. He looked like the photo of Joyce Carey that her father had kept on his bookshelf, next to a row of Carey's novels. Despite his job as ship captain and chief naturalist, he seemed to her a shy man. He spoke mostly of animals and geography, which given their position made sense, but days passed, and she never learned a thing about him except what she might deduce. Irish. Eventually, she even had to ask. She learned he was from Belfast, his dad Protestant, mother Catholic. Something had sent him aloft, she thought as she watched him. It had been an escape, perhaps. A refuge. An ascension into solitude. Then, after years had passed, perhaps, he had gotten lonely and begun running these tour cruises. This was her theory. Now, he liked to share the pleasures of his life aloft, and he gained some company by it, some conversation. And he had an expertise he could teach to people, the various joys and fascinations of a bird's life. An Arctic tern he was, back and forth, pole to pole. A few years before he had hired an events coordinator in London, who booked his tours and helped him arrange their various ports of call. So, nature cruise. Mary was still very dubious. It was not her kind of thing. She doubted she would do it again. Still, for now, the other passengers were pleasant. Some Norwegians, a few Chinese, a family from Sri Lanka. They were all interested to see the world from the air, in particular the world's animals. Earth was big. At this height, at this speed, that immensity was becoming clearer and clearer. Of course, scale was so variable. Pale blue, mote of dust in the sunlight, true enough, but from this vantage it was beyond enormous. You could walk your whole life and never cover more than a small fraction of it. Now they lofted like an eagle over it. "We're so stupid," she said to Art one night. He looked at her, startled. It was late. They were alone in the viewing room. The others had gone to bed. This had already happened once or twice before. It was beginning to look like a habit, a little conspiracy to chat. "I don't think so," he said. "Sure you do," she replied. "Why else are you up here?" Again, he was startled. His other guests didn't speak to him like this, she saw. "Didn't something drive you up here?" she pressed. "Oh," he said. "Let's not talk about that." She relented, feeling she had gone too fast, hit a wall. "You like the beauty," she said. "I know. And it is beautiful." "It is," he agreed quickly. "I never get over it." She smiled. "You're lucky." "It's true." And he added, "Especially tonight." She laughed at that. He was still young enough to blush. She knew that kind of fair skin very well. Her grandmother had blushed furiously right into her 90s. After that conversation, the habit was set. They stayed for a nightcap in the viewing chamber after the others had retired. There they had the view of everything below. When he dimmed the room lights, the world below them became visible. This was especially true when the moon was up. Then the land and ocean became eldritch things, glittery and dark, distinct in their forms. The airship also had a tiny viewing chamber on top of its big body, there among the solar panels, so that Art and his guests could see the stars when the moon was down. In its earliest phase, after the thin glowing crescent of the moon set, he took guests up through the body of the ship to this chamber to observe the star bowl. One night at new moon, he led Mary up there after the others had retired. Milky Way low in the west, Orion climbing up over the eastern horizon. All of this very far from cities, and at 5,000 feet, it was simply amazing how many stars they could see. It was a whole different sky, primal and alive. Art knew the constellations, and some of the stories behind them. He had a telescope in that bubble set with a tracking motor that kept it fixed wherever he aimed it, but on that night, he left it alone. He taught Mary to see a galaxy visible to the naked eye, in the north near Cassiopeia. But mostly they stayed in what he called the understudy, looking down at the Earth. As they flew down the Atlantic, over Iceland, then the Hebrides, then Ireland, this last part for her, and for him too, perhaps, then over the Bay of Biscay, they would say goodnight to everyone, then she would go to her cabin, go to the bathroom, change clothes perhaps, and slip down the private stairs he had taught her to find, using the key code he had taught her to use, back to the viewing room at the bow, now locked and empty, except for them. One night, they watched the pillars of Hercules float by below them, framing the Strait of Gibraltar. The little lumps of Gibraltar rock and Jebel Musa stood like sentinels over the black water. Art told Mary the story of the flooding of the Mediterranean. It had been a dry, low plain between Europe and Africa. Then, as an ice age had ended and sea level rose, the Atlantic had spilled through this strait into what had been flat playas. 2 years of flow, he said, at 1,000 times the rate of the Amazon, moving at 40 meters a second and carving a channel 1,000 feet deep until the Med was filled and the two bodies of water equalized in elevation. When did that happen? About 5 million years ago, they say. There isn't total agreement. She watched him closely. A flood, a sudden breakthrough. Now he was talking about the end of the last ice age, 15,000 years ago, when enormous lakes of meltwater on top of the great ice sheet had broken through ice dams and poured down into the ocean in stupendous floods, changing the climate of the whole world. Then the Mediterranean had risen high enough to flood through the hills of the Bosporus, filling the Black Sea's area in just a few years' time, flooding land that had been occupied by humans, giving rise to the legend of Noah's flood. He was nattering on. He was perhaps a little nervous. Was he a dry plain himself? She wondered. A space waiting to be flooded? Was she the Atlantic, he the Mediterranean? And she? Was she rising? Would she pour over into him and fill him up? There was no way to know, no rush to decide. They were headed for Antarctica, and they hadn't even reached the equator yet. There was time. She could enjoy the idea of it, mull it over in mind and body. When she got up to go to her cabin at the end of that night, she leaned over and gave him a quick kiss on the top of the head. Across the Atlas Mountains, east over the Sahel. Here there were new salt lakes and marshes being created by water pumped up from the Atlantic or the Mediterranean. Salt seas and dry basins. An interesting experiment. They definitely changed things. Here in the Sahel, the dust storms that used to fly off these desert basins over the Atlantic were much diminished, and certain kinds of plankton out to sea were going hungry. Unexpected consequences, no, unforeseen consequences. Because now they were expected, even when they couldn't be predicted. For now, the desert below them was dotted by long lakes. Green, brown, sky blue, cobalt. Cat's paws. Little towns hugged their shores, or stood on outcrops nearby. Irrigated fields formed circles on the land, circles of green and yellow, like quilting art. Local culture was said to be thriving, Art said. Polls indicated most residents loved their new lakes, especially younger people. Without them we would have left, they said. The land was dying, the world had killed it. Now it would live. A red dawn, punctuated by two black masses rising up higher than they were, Ethiopian highlands to their left, Mounts Kenya and Kilimanjaro to their right. As they flew through this immense gap, Art told them about Jules Verne's first hit novel, 5 Weeks in a Balloon. Also about his later works The Mysterious Island and The Clipper of the Clouds, both describing balloon and airship travels, as did of course a big part of Around the World in 80 Days. Art also told them about Verne's Invasion of the Sea, which told the story of pumping seawater onto Saharan deserts to create lakes, just as they had seen during the previous few days. Verne's books had bewitched him as a youth, he said. An idea of how to live. He had taught himself French in order to read them in the original, said that Verne's prose was far better than people usually supposed when judging by the wretched early translations. And so we're here, one of them said, with our own Captain Nemo. Yes, Art replied easily. But without his brooding, or so I hope. This said with a lightning glance Mary's way. I hope I'm more like Passepartout. Passing by all, you know, with the least amount of difficulty. The green and gray masses of Mounts Kenya and Kilimanjaro loomed over them to the south, one very flat-topped, the other a little flat-topped. Neither had glaciers, nor any sign of snow. No such thing as the snows of Kilimanjaro. Something they could only hope for in distant times to come. But the Great Plains of East Africa were still populated by animals. Yes, they were now doing a safari from the air. Elephants, giraffes, antelopes, great herds of all these, migrating from river to river. Some of the stream's water was now piped in, Art said quietly. Desalinated at the seashore and then piped up to the headwaters and released to keep the streams flowing, the herds alive. They were in their 12th straight year of drought. Then Madagascar. The reforestation of that big island had been happening for well over a generation, and such was the fecundity of life that its rugged hillsides already looked densely forested, dark and wild. It had changed during Art's time aloft, he said, and now the people of Madagascar were joining with Cubans and other island nations to help similar restoration efforts all over the world. Indonesia, Brazil, and West Africa were teammates in this effort. Rewilding, Art called it. They were rewilding down there. That night when Mary joined Art in his understudy, Madagascar was already behind them, but the air still seemed to carry its spicy scent. Art sat looking back at the island, bulking like a sea creature with thick napped fur. He seemed content. They sipped their whiskeys for a while, enjoying a companionable silence. Then they talked about other voyages they had made. He asked about her escape on foot over the Alps, apparently a famous story of her professional life, and she made it brief, talked about the Escanian Sea and Thomas and Sibylla and the Frundenjoch. Have you flown your clipper over the Alps? She asked. Once or twice, he said. It's a bit much. They're too high. And the weather is just so variable. I love the Alps, she said. They've caught my affection. He regarded her with a little smile. A shy Irishman. She knew that type, and liked it. She had always liked those men who kept to themselves, who had only a sidelong look for her. Probably there was something back there in his past, some event or situation that had made him so aloof, but the island world he had made for himself was one that she was coming to like. Or she could see why he liked it. He was younger than she was, but old enough that they were in that temporal space that felt roughly contemporaneous. These were fleeting thoughts. Mostly, she just watched the ocean and the great black island behind them, slowly receding. But they were thoughts that led in a certain direction. She tried to track them, as if they were shy animals. Desire stirring in her. Maybe that was like a tracker's curiosity. On the hunt. A hope for contact. Then in the midst of her musing he stood, saying he was feeling tired. Time for bed. He led the way up to the main gallery, said good night, and turned toward his cabin. Not a mind reader, she thought. Recalling that in her youth, she had seemed to be able to reach out telepathically. Or maybe it had been a matter of looks, of pheromones. Animals in heat. Not at their age. But there was no rush. Nothing more than that happened between them for the rest of that voyage. They still met on some nights in the viewing chamber to chat, but no more Madagascars. They were too far south. Over the endless ocean, angling west to fight the great shove of the westerlies. Their pushback caused the clipper to tremble and rock more than earlier in their voyage. Then one morning she woke and went to the viewing chamber, and there to the south lay Antarctica. Everyone was standing at the forward window to see it. The ocean was distinctly darker than before, almost black, which itself was strange and faintly ominous. Then to the south a white land like a low wall, white flecked with a blacker than the strangely black sea. This great escarpment of ice and rock extended from east to west for as far as they could see. Antarctica. It was early autumn, the sea ice minimal, although as they flew south they saw that there were icebergs everywhere. These made no pattern, just white chunks on black water. An occasional misshapen iceberg of jade or turquoise hue. Flocks, or it seemed rather shoals, of tiny penguins dotted some of these icebergs. Once they flew over a pod of orcas, sleek-backed and ominous. On tabular bergs they sometimes saw Weddell seals, looking like slugs splayed on the ice, often with smaller slugs attached to their sides like leeches. Mother and child. Their cousins down here thriving on ice. If they were thriving, then Antarctica itself. White and foreboding. Ice planet. It was surreal in that icy desolation to come on 6 giant aircraft carriers, arranged in a rough hexagon like a coven of city-states, surrounded by smaller craft, icebreakers, tugboats, shore craft. It was hard to tell what the smaller craft might be. They were so small. Apparently, aircraft carriers made excellent polar stations, being nuclear-powered and outweighing ordinary icebreakers by 1,000 times or more. Sea ice stood no chance against such behemoths. They were icebreakers from God and could leave any time they wanted to, but they didn't. They made a little floating city, anchored by the shore of Antarctica, supporting various inland encampments, all of which had been airlifted up country from here. They passed over the carrier city and landed on the snowy surface of the continent itself. Out of the clipper onto flat snow. Very bright and very cold, although no colder than Zurich on a windy winter's day. Around them cloth-walled huts, blue glass boxes. The camp managers were happy to meet Mary, seemed to consider her their patroness, which made her laugh. And they were well acquainted with Captain Art, a frequent visitor. The glacier slowdown operation had been a success. Ice fields had therefore also slowed. All this would have been impossible without the Navy's helping. Aircraft carriers were mobile towns. Deploying them like this was a chance to make use of the huge amounts of money that had been spent building them. Swords into plowshares kind of thing. Like the Swiss, Mary observed. Can we see a pumping site? Of course. Already scheduled. For sure a feature of interest. All of Art's passengers occupied only a corner of one of their giant helicopters. Helmets on, sit sideways looking out through a small window, then up, straight up, not like the Clipper's rise. Then over endless white snow, listening to the pilot and her crew discuss things in a language she didn't recognize. Black sea behind them receding from view. Why is the ocean black down here? She asked into her helmet's microphone. No one knows. I heard one guy say it's because the water is so clean down here and the bottom's so deep starting from right offshore that you're seeing down to the dark part of the ocean where the sunlight doesn't penetrate. So you're seeing through super clear water to the black of the deeps. Can that be right? I heard the plankton down here are black, and they color the water. Lots of days it looks as blue as anywhere, I think. No way. Then they were descending.
Snow or ice as far as they could see.
Then a cluster of black dots. Around the dots black threads, like a broken spider web. These dots and lines held civilization suspended over the abyss. How many stations are there like this one? She asked. 5 or 600. And how many people does that add up to? The stations are mostly automated. Maintenance and repair crews fly in as needed. There are caretakers in some of them. But mainly it's construction crews, moving around at need. I don't know, 20,000 people? It fluctuates. There were more a few years ago. The helo landed with a four-square thump. They unbelted, stood awkwardly, filed down the narrow gap between seats and wall, and down metal steps to the ice.
Cold. Bright. Windy. Cold.
Light blasted around the edges of her sunglasses and blinded her. Tears were blown off her eyes onto her sunglasses, where they froze in smears. She tried to see through all that. Blinking hard, she followed the others toward the settlement's main hut, like a blue-walled motor home on stilts. Wait, I don't want to go inside yet, she protested. I want to see. A couple of their hosts stayed out with her and walked her to a pump, which stood inside a little heated hut of its own. Not very heated, as the floor inside was ice, with the black housing of the pump plunging right into it. The saving of civilization, right there before her. A piece of plumbing. They went back outside and followed one of the pipelines up a gentle gradient. It stretched across the land from black box to black box, lying right on the ice. Mary stopped to look around. The snow seemed to her like a lake surface that had flash frozen, all its little waves caught mid-break, glowing in the light. Her guides explained things to her. She liked their enthusiasm. They were happy to be here not because they were saving the world, but because they were in Antarctica. If you like it, one told her when she asked, you like it a lot. It gets into you, until nowhere else seems as good. A white plain under a blue dome. Some cirrus clouds over them looked close enough to touch. It's like another planet, Mary said. Yes, they said. But actually just Earth.
Thank you, she said to them.
Now I'm ready to go back. I'm glad to have seen this. It's just amazing. Thank you for showing it to me. But now let's go back. Because I too have a place I love. They flew north up the Atlantic to see St. Helena and Ascension. Before Art dropped Mary off in Lisbon, where she would train home, she joined him in his understudy one last time. When they were sitting in their usual spots, sipping their drams, she said, "Will we meet again?" He looked uncertain. "I hope so." She regarded him. A shy man. Some animals are reclusive. "Why do you do this?" she said. "I like it." "What do you do when you're on the ground?" "I resupply." "Aren't there any places you like to walk around?" He considered this. "I like Venice. And London. New York. Hong Kong, if it isn't too hot." She stared at him for a while. He shifted his gaze down, clearly uncomfortable. Finally he said, "Mostly I just like being here. I like the sky people. The sky villages are a lot of fun to visit. I like the way they look, and the people in them. Everyone's on a voyage. Did you ever read The 21 Balloons? It's an old children's book about a sky village. Like your Jules Verne." "Yes, but for kids." "Verne is for kids," Mary didn't say. "Anyway, I read it when I was about 5. Actually, my mom read it to me." "Is your mom still alive?"
No.
"She died 5 years ago." "Sorry to hear." "Is your mom still alive?"
No.
"My parents both died young." They sat there for a while. Mary saw that he was unsettled, rejecting all the fashionable diagnostics of their time, knowing him to be fond of her. Maybe, she pondered it.
So he was quiet.
Perhaps he was shy. Perhaps he played a part for people. Captain Art, she was not quiet, nor was she shy. A bossy, forward girl, one teacher had said of her at school, and that was true. So, she could only guess at him. But this was always the case with everyone, and it seemed to her they got along. His silence was restful, as if he were content. She wasn't content, and she wasn't sure she had ever met anyone who was, so it was a hard thing for her to recognize. Maybe she was wrong. No one was content. She was projecting onto his silence. But from what and onto what? Oh, it was all such a muddle, such a swamp of guesswork and feeling. "I like you," she said. "And you like me." "I do," he said firmly, and then waved a hand, as if to push that aside. "I don't mean to be intrusive." "Please," Mary said. "I'm about to disembark here." "True. And so?" "And so what?" Mary sighed. She was going to have to do the work here. "So, maybe we can meet again." "I'd like that." After a pause during which Mary watched him, making him go on if he would, he said, "You could come with me again. Be my celebrity guide. We could make a tour of all the greatest landscape restoration sites or geoengineering projects." "God spare me." He laughed. "Or whatever you like. Your favorite cities. You could be a guest curator or whatnot." "I'd rather just be your girlfriend." His eyebrows rose at that, as if it were an entirely new idea. She sighed. "I'll think about it. One nature cruise may be enough for me, but some ideas might come to me." He took a deep breath, held it, let it out in a long sigh. Now he looked really content. He glanced at her, met her eye, did not look away, smiled. "I always come back to Zurich. I have my room there." She nodded, thinking it over. Say it took years to get to know this man. What else did she have to do? "I'll want you to talk a bit more than you have," she warned him. "I'll want to know things about you." "I'll try," he said. "I might have some things to say." She laughed at that, knocked back the whiskey in her shot glass. It was late. "Good," she said. She stood and kissed him on the top of the head, ignoring his flinch away. "Maybe you can tell me when you're in town, and we can get together. Fastnacht is at the end of the winter. That's a party I like. We could do the town on Fastnacht." He frowned. "I'll be out on another trip that month. I'm not sure I'll be back by then." Mary stopped herself from sighing, from saying anything sharp. This was not going to be anything quick or even normal. "We'll figure it out," she said. "Now I'm off to bed." Chapter 103. I don't think anyone ever figured out. Chapter 103. I don't think anyone ever figured out who organized it. Whoever they were, they wanted to stay out of the way and have it look self-organized. Have it emerge out of the zeitgeist. And maybe it did. I mean, ultimately we all did do it together. It was already a feeling everyone had. I think something like 3 billion people tapped their phones to say they had taken part. It was sort of like New Year's Eve, except it was agreed it should be a simultaneous moment all over the earth. Near the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, like Nowruz or Easter. Having it be the same very moment for all seemed right. It was important to feel the connection with everyone and everything else as a kind of vibe. Kulike in Hawaiian means harmony, or La Oluolu, Harmony Day. Evoke the new sphere, call it into existence by everyone thinking of it at the same time. That's not a time-delayed thing. It has to be simultaneous. So we in Hawaii kind of got the short end of the stick, time-wise. The timing was presented as a given, which I think means that someone somewhere had to be doing it in terms of organization, but anyway, East Asia got the late night, then going west they went down through the time zone hours until Western Europe got noon, then across the Atlantic it got earlier and earlier across the Americas, to a dawn patrol kind of thing on the west coast. So we in Hawaii were looking at 3 a.m. I think it was. Fine, whatever, an excuse to stay up all night and party, and it has to be admitted that it was still nice and warm for us even in the middle of the night, so we could go to Diamond Head and look out over the ocean as we partied. And the moon was full that night, no coincidence, I'm sure. So it was nice. Down in the concert bowl, bands played through the night, and we sat on the ridge talking and drinking and watching the ocean by moonlight. Good south swell too, so that a lot of us were talking about going to Point Panic at sunup to catch some waves. Great way to finish this event. Back in Mother Ocean where we all began. Slight offshore wind too. So the time came and we listened to the voices on our phones. We are the children of this planet. We're going to sing its praises all together. All at once. Now is the time to express our love, to take the responsibilities that come with being stewards of this earth, devotees of this sacred space. One planet, on and on it went. It seemed clear to me that the original had been written in some other language, that we were listening to a translation into English. And, in fact, you could tap around and hear what was being said in other languages. Gupta insisted on listening to it in Sanskrit, which he admits he doesn't understand when spoken, though he reads it, but he claimed that what we were hearing had to have been written or thought originally in Sanskrit, maybe even thousands of years ago. And in fact, the Sanskrit version did sound very primal, which made me curious, and I clicked around and found a version in Proto-Indo-European, why not? It sounded like Spanish. I switched to Basque, supposedly a living fossil of a language, and it too sounded like Spanish. Actually, both sounded quite a bit stranger than Spanish, older than Spanish, odd, harsh primal sounds, but no more so than Dutch or many another language that isn't Hawaiian. You always hear all the same sounds, and no matter which language I tapped on, I kept hearing Mama Gaia. Yes, of course, Mama would be one of the oldest words, maybe the first word. Invented over and over by babies trying their best to talk but having limited control of their mouths, and yet always trying to say the same thing, to beseech or celebrate that great goddess filling their sight, the fountain and source of all food, warmth, touch, love, and eye contact. Mama. I cried out that night on the ridge, seeing the why of it for the first time, the why of everything. Of course, it's a category error on my part to genderize the planet in that crass way, but we were high that night on the Worldwide Love Fest, and since everyone else was singing and cheering and hooting as after having caught a great ride on a great wave, I just kept shouting Mamma Mia. Mamma Mia. Because of course, being human, the other first word we speak is always me, mine, me, and God bless the Italians and whoever else in the Romance languages for holding fast to that very first you are phrase, the same in all the languages. I checked Proto-Indo-European, and sure enough it was the same there too, Mamma Mia. Mamma Mia. Genius. Yes, I was a little drunk, a little high, a little giddy. I mean, think about it, a worldwide moment during which all sentient beings aware of the project were to sing praise together to the one planet we stood on, to perform the new sphere created by this so vast and complex biosphere, while standing on the lithosphere and contemplating the hydrosphere and circulating the atmosphere in and out of us, breath after breath. It's great, but it's a little hypothetical too, right? It's hard to know how to feel it. What could we do in that moment but try? As a linguist, I naturally think of the words involved, but there was more to it than that. So I tried all that too. I drank and I looked around at the faces of the other people on the ridge, all of them also trying, and many of them had their dogs with them there, The dogs too were trying to understand it, very aware that something unusual was happening, such that some of them barked or howled, which some guys instantly took up. Of course it was time to howl. Howl at the moon like wolves. What a great language. And besides, we were like wolves. We turned wolves into dogs, and they turned us into humans. We were something like orangutans before, solitaries who didn't know how to work together. It was the wolves who taught us the idea of friendship and cooperation. So we howled at the moon and hugged the people around us if they were hugging types and the dogs, and I kept looking at all the faces, so vivid and real, and I kept coming back to saying Mamma Mia, as one does when in awe. Hugging Gracie in particular as always. We're lucky that way. This went on for about 15 minutes. Then we quieted down. Time to get back down in the bowl of the concert space and dance to the music for what was left of the night. Had we done it right? Had we joined with every sentient being on the planet, brought into existence a new Earth religion that would change everything? Were we all brother and sister now, as they were always telling us we should be? Hard to tell. It felt like a lark. But larks are beautiful. All these bird and animal names we use for our moods and actions, of course, they're always perfectly apparent. We are all family, as the new religion was telling us, and as every living thing on Earth shares a crucial 938 base pairs of DNA, I guess it's really true. So yeah, we went down there and danced all night long, feeling very high, and when the sky lightened and dawn approached, and they sent us out to greet the day and go home and do whatever we were going to do that day, they played Brutta is Israel Kamakawiwole's medley of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and What a Wonderful World, a great piece of Hawaiian schmaltz that we could sing along with on our way out, and hum the rest of the day. Later I read that people said they really felt it, that moment when everyone worldwide sang the same song of praise and devotion. It was said to be like an electric pulse filling you, or like that. I must admit, I didn't feel anything like that in the moment itself. Maybe I was too drunk or too aware of Gracie's hand on my ass, but that morning I caught the longest left in my life at Point Panic, with Brutta Is's pair of tunes running in my head the whole time. What a wonderful world indeed. And I flew out of that wave just before it closed out, and up there in the air over the wave, suspended weightless with the offshore spray, and not seeing the Ahukai rainbow, because I was right there. In it, yes, that's when I felt it. Of course, it doesn't come on command or to a schedule. Grace isn't like that. It touches down on you in unexpected moments, a matter of accidents, but you have to be open to it too, so maybe that was it for me, a slight delay after the sacred ceremony, which maybe was the riding of that wave anyway. Anyway, I felt it then, hanging in the air, then I crashed back down onto the white hissing backside and swam head up, laughing out loud. Yes, it worked. Mamma Mia. Chapter 104. Back in Zurich, Mary Chapter 104. Back in Zurich, Mary told the Swiss that she was going to move out of her safe house. Retirement had changed her security status. She didn't need to occupy a safe house that was probably needed for others, and so on. They didn't object. They didn't want her to move back to her apartment on Hochstrasse, but neither did she. That faded blue apartment block was now part of her past. It wouldn't come back. It was time to move on. And she had an idea, anyway. There were housing cooperatives all over Zurich. She didn't want to move into the one Frank had lived in. That too was the past. Anyway, it was Art's place too, and so, for multiple reasons, she felt it wasn't a good idea. But there were other housing co-ops in Zurich, a lot of them it turned out, and so she spent some time visiting a few. During these visits around the city, she realized that she liked her neighborhood. Fluntern, it was called, there on the lower slope of the Zuriberg. She liked it there. It was her neighborhood. So, in a less strongly felt way, was the district behind the Utoquai Schwimmbad. She liked that part of town too. So she focused on those two neighborhoods, and then the area between them. They weren't that far apart. Of course, the whole city was compact. There were some cooperatives that were all right, but most didn't quite suit, and almost all of them had waiting lists that would take quite a while to work through to her. The more she looked, the more she realized how much she had liked her old place. But she needed to change. Finally, she found a place because Badam knew she was looking for one. Someone who had been working for him in the ministry had to move back to Ticino to care for her father, and when she heard from Badam that Mary was looking for a place, she wanted Mary to take it. It could be an informal arrangement, she said, a kind of sublease, The board had heard her appeal concerning this plan and liked the idea of having Mary Murphy among them, and so had approved it. It was just several blocks from her old place, south past her usual tram stop at Kirchhoff-Luntern and along Bergstrasse to an odd three-street corner where the co-op took up one wedge of the intersection. A little 20-apartment co-op, 4 stories high, well-maintained like every other building in Zurich, all except for the old wreck across from the tram stop one down from Kirchhoff-Luntern, which was some kind of special thing. The woman subletting it to her met her at the door of the place.
Trudy Majori, she said.
Mary said, shaking her hand. I've seen you around the office. The woman nodded. I worked 2 buildings down, but I took notes for Badham at a lot of your meetings. I sat against the wall with the other assistants. And I went with you on a trip to India. Ah, yes, I remember now. Trudy led her up the broad stairs of their stairwell. On the top floor, she unlocked the door of her place. It used to be the attic, she explained as she opened it. I hope you don't mind. You get used to it. It had been a very small and low attic, Mary saw at once. It was a single room, tucked under the big roof beam of the building such that only under the roof beam itself could you stand upright. To left and right of it the ceiling sloped down until the walls to left and right were only about 2 feet high. The left side of the room did have an interior wall sticking out into the room, and a door in that wall opened on the bathroom, which likewise sloped down to a low wall. It was hyper-clean, like any Swiss bathroom, of course, but as with the rest of the place, about half its volume was far less than head high. The toilet was located past the sink, kind of a woman's apartment in that sense, in that you could sit on it, but if you stood before it you would have to duck. I like it, Mary said. It's funny. Trudy looked pleased. I like it too. I'm sorry I have to leave, but I'm glad you'll be the one in it. I admire what you did.
Thank you, Mary said.
She walked up and down the midline. Past the bathroom, the room widened again to the left, and there lay the bed, set right on the floor. To lie down on it, it would be easiest to sit first on a short chair set next to it, and then roll on. Once in bed, it didn't matter how low the ceiling was, as long as you didn't leap to your feet in a dream or something like that. The kitchen was back against the wall next to the front door, just a counter with a sink in it, and to the left a stove and a short refrigerator. All very functional. I'll take it, of course, she said. I really appreciate it. Me too, Trudy said. After that, they went out for coffee in a bakery next door and traded a bit of their stories. Trudy watched her curiously, as if trying to correlate her with the minister she had known in the office. Mary resisted an impulse to explain herself, so she had a place. Her Swiss security team helped her to move, checking out her room as they did so. Priska and Sibylla were none too impressed. Thomas and Jurg thought it was funny. Once settled in, she tried to form a new rhythm for her days. No more going to work. She didn't want to intrude. She hoped they might ask her for help in some capacity or other, but in fact, now that she had seen how things had gone at the meeting in San Francisco, she realized that there was probably little help she could give. The authority of her position had been a big part of her effectiveness. That was a little chastening, but no doubt true. Now that she was a private citizen, it was an open question what she could do to help them or anyone. Well, she could always get her habits back. Up in the morning, tram down to Utokwai, walk to the Schwimmbad into the locker room, go to her locker into her swimsuit, kissing the ghost of Tatiana, so beautiful, feeling the pain of her death, and then insisting it again, chilling it off by stepping down the metal steps into the water, BRR, and out into the lake. Thinking of someone gone kept them just that tiny bit alive, maybe. The Zurich Sea, blue and calm, cool and silky. Offshore swimming freestyle, until she could look back and see the near shore properly, then a few circles of breaststroke, to see the whole city, now looking so low and far away. It was a big lake. If she felt strong enough, she could join the swim across the lake at the end of the summer, see what that felt like. It felt good to be out there. Of course, this part of her habit set would only work from May or June through October. In the other months, both water and air were just too cold. But as a summer thing, a beautiful way to start the day. Then back up to her place, join the communal lunch in the co-op, talk to people if they wanted to, but it was important not to impose English on them, and as the talk around her was usually in Schweizerdeutsch, guttural and sing-songy, she didn't start conversations much. She liked being in the midst of their talk without being part of the conversation. It was soothing. She could feel her body relax from her swim, slope down into her chair like a cat, satisfied just to be among people, unconcerned with the content of their chatter. Later that year, she began to go to the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, which was headquartered in Geneva but had a small office in Zurich. Issuing UN passports to refugees, closing the camps, or rather opening them, emptying them, had made for a lot of work. Naturally, the Swiss were intent to get it done, so when she presented herself at the Zurich office, they were happy to give her things to do. In fact, they wanted to use her fame to rally more volunteers, and she agreed to that, but only if she could do some basic work too. The local work also kept her carbon burn low, because that too was a project she wanted to pursue. Almost everyone in the co-op was part of the 2000 Watt Society, so staying low burn was not that difficult. The communal meals were vegetarian for the most part, and calculations were made for everything they did so that she could keep a personal count easily enough and always had people around to answer her questions. If she stayed in Zurich, if she traveled in Switzerland, in Europe, even around the world, they had all these rated for energy costs and also carbon burn, though the latter was getting lower and lower, especially if you stayed in Switzerland and used public transport. Together, the occupants of the place owned one electric car, and there was a sign-up sheet for it, often almost empty, but not always. Most of the people living in the co-op actually traveled quite a bit in Europe, but factoring that in, they still came to the end of the year, having used well less than the amount of kilowatt hours the 2000 Watt Society was calling for. The whole country was getting closer to hitting that usage goal. The world would then have a model to follow. Her housemates were sure other countries would then match them. Mary was not so sure, but did not argue. She just lived the life. Quickly her habits clicked into place, day after day the same. She lived through the week trying to feel if she liked it, trying to figure out how to do more at the UNHCR, and so on. Day after day, week after week. Never had she been so immersed in Swissness. Before she had been an international person living an international life. Now she was a foreign-born Zürcher, living in Zurich. Recognizing this change, she added a German class to her days. Turned out that would be easiest in the evenings. The city offered free classes. The people who signed up for them were from all over the world. She joined a class that met nearby on Monday nights. The language was wicked, the teacher kindly. Oscar Fenninger, a white-haired man who had lived in Japan and Korea and knew English among other languages, but would not speak any of them with his students, at least not in class. Nothing but German in class. So they blundered together through the hours of his lessons, and went out afterward for pizza, though they spoke English. As the months went on, they even tried speaking German to each other, shyly and with much laughter. Turned out they were all taking the class to fit better in Switzerland. The days grew short, the air chill. The leaves on the lindens turned yellow, and the west wind swept them away. The fire maples on the lanes running down to the ETH went incandescent red. Up on the Zuriberg, the views got longer as the trees got bare-limbed and the air chilled and grew clear. She took walks up there around sunset, trudging up the hill, wandering the paths, then clumping or floating back down, depending on her mood. The nude concrete woman holding up her green loops of garden hose always regarded the weather stoically. Mary liked the way she held firm her position. "I, too, will be a concrete woman," she said to her as she passed. The year turned. She got through Christmas and New Year's without going to Ireland, and without thinking much about anything. The ministry's team invited her to their holiday parties, and she went to them. Once at one of these, she stood out on a balcony with Badam. They looked down on the lights of the night city, elbows on the rail. "How's it going?" she said. He considered it. "Pretty well, I guess. I had a good time on Gaia Day." He laughed. "That wasn't us. But I did too. Where did you go for it?" "I was out on the lake, swimming with some friends from my club. We made a ring and held hands." He smiled. "Did you feel the moment?" "No. It was too cold." "Me neither. But people seemed to like it. I think it was worth supporting. I still think we need a religion. If others feel the same, who knows? I think it was good. And I'm sure you're following on." "We are." but it's something that has to come from inside. Mary regarded him curiously. Even now she knew so little about him, really. Her man from Nepal. She had heard things recently, not to her face, but around the internet, rumors to the effect that the Ministry for the Future had been thousands strong and had waged a savage war against the carbon oligarchy, murdering hundreds and tipping the balance of history in a new direction. Bollocks, no doubt, but people dearly loved such stories. The idea that it all happened in the light of day was too frightening, history being as obviously out of control as it was. Better to have secret plots ordering things, in a realm without witnesses. Not that she completely disbelieved this particular tale. Her man had a look that could freeze your blood, and a lot of money had disappeared into his division without explanation. "Do you have someone now like I had you?" she asked him curiously. He looked over the side of the balcony. Bare linden branches below. "Someone to do the dirty work, you mean?" "Yes." He laughed. "No," he said. "No one I trust the way you trusted me. I don't know how you did it." "I don't either. Actually, you made me do it. Right? I mean, what choice did I have? You could have fired me, I suppose. But I never even thought of that. I'm not that stupid." He laughed again. "Or you were entirely deceived." "I don't think so. But now, for you, it must be a problem. You need someone you can trust." He nodded. "I know. It's my problem. But I don't know. Maybe the need isn't as great now. Or I'm doing both and I don't let my right hand know what my left hand is doing?" She shook her head. "I don't think that's possible." "No, I suppose not. What about your team? I mean, in the darker side of things. There must be some people there who could do what you did, I suppose." "I'll have to think about that." "I don't know. What I think now is that what you did was way harder than I thought it was." "What do you mean?" "You trusted me." She regarded him. She wondered if it were true. Maybe it was. "Sometimes you have to," she said finally. "You just throw yourself out there. Throw yourself off the cliff and start making the parachute. Or start to fly," he suggested. She nodded dubiously. She didn't think they could fly. "Let me know if I can help," she said. "I will." But he was shaking his head very slightly. No one could help him with this. As with so many things, they went back into the party. As they crossed the threshold from balcony to room, he touched her arm. "Thanks, Mary." Chapter 105. After we were given our passports. Chapter 105. After we were given our passports, we put our names on a few lists and waited some more. Of course, those were the days that felt longest of all. Finally, we got lucky. Our names came up on one of the Swiss cantonal lists for Canton-Bern, in fact, where we had been all along. We were invited to move to Kandersteg, a village up in the Oberland, on a train line, where the line ran into one end of a tunnel which cut under the mountain south to the valley. Said to be quiet, a bit of a backwater. Room in a hostel for us and apartments being built. We said yes. My daughter, her husband, their 2 little ones. Once there we moved into the hostel and got on the waiting list for an apartment building soon to be finished. Kandersteg turned out to be a very Swiss village, like a set from a movie, a rather cliched movie, but fine, we were there. A family from Syria. There were 5 other refugee families living there, from Jordan, Iran, Libya, Somalia, and Mauritania. We said hello to them cautiously. Of course, we all knew about the SVP, the Schweizerische Volkspartei, the Swiss People's Party. They do well in the mountain cantons and they don't like immigrants. People in the Fremdenkontrolle and the SEM, the State Secretariat for Migration, were often only marginally helpful to us or even unfriendly, but the SVP are actively hostile. It's best to avoid attention. Part of that means not gathering in groups with other refugees, looking together so dark and strange. Unheimlich. We all knew that. When we met, at first it tended to be privately. So, a day came when I stood outside the doorway of our hostel. Green Alps rising all around, gray mountains above them leaping to the sky. Like living in the bottom of an immense roofless room, or even at the bottom of a well. But a quick creek in a drainage channel ran right through the middle of the village, making a cheerful sound. The air was clean and cold, the sunlight on the rocks above a thick yellow. A real place, despite its unreal look. And we were here. Here, after 12 years in a Turkish camp, 2 years on the move trying to get to Germany, very crazy years, very hard, then 14 more years in the Swiss camp north of Bern. Now we are finally somewhere. And yet now I find I am 71 years old. My life has passed. I will not say it was wasted, that's not right. We took care of each other, and we taught the children. They got a good education in that camp. We did what we could with what we had. It was the life we could make. And now we're here. And the SCM awarded us a small lump sum based on how long we had stayed in the camp, and that being so long for us, it wasn't all that small. We could combine it with the savings of the Jordanian family new to Kandersteg, and together we rented an empty space in a building on the main street between the train station and the cable car terminus. The space had been used as a bakery, so it was not too difficult or expensive to change it into a little restaurant. Middle Eastern food, we were told to call it. Kebabs and falafel and other things people already knew about. Then, when we got them into our place, we could have them try dishes more interesting. 6 tables and we would be full. It seemed possible and it was interesting to try. Well, who am I kidding? It was exciting to try. Of course, I am old now, but there is no changing that, except by death. At least I have this day, and these days. All that happened before seems now to have happened to someone else. It's like remembering a previous incarnation, especially home itself. I remember when I left Damascus, I looked around and promised myself I would someday come back. Damascus isn't like any other city. It's old, the oldest capital left on earth, and you can tell that when you're there. It's in the streets and the way it feels at night. And when we were released from the camp, I had the chance to return. I even got a plane ticket. I went to Cloten thinking I'll just go back and see it. The family didn't want to go, but I did. But then in Cloten, I had I don't know what, a kind of a breakdown, I guess. Who is this going back, and why? I tried to put it together, all the pieces of my life, and I couldn't do it. I concluded that the person who thought of going back was not me, that I was no longer that person. The years in the camp had taken me, day by day, the same day every day, to another person. So at the last minute I said no to myself, and went back down to the train station under Cloten and returned to the camp. My family greeted me curiously, unaware of this shift, this fact that a different person had returned to them. "Are you okay?" they asked, and I said yes, I'm okay. I just don't want to go anymore. I didn't understand it, so how could I explain it? Who can tell the riddle of their own true self? So, all right, a new person. Old but new. I think about what I have now as this new person in her life, not quite my life, it seems, but I'm trying to get my head around it. We work all day to prepare a meal. It's a fixed menu for those who want the whole supper, and we take reservations, which sometimes happen and sometimes not, but by 8 or 9 the restaurant is mostly full. Easy with the 6 tables. It's almost like hosting a dinner party at home, except instead of friends coming over, it's strangers. Or, let's call them acquaintances. Many are there for the first time, but some have been before and come back. We always greet those ones with a smile, and they often talk to each other. Swiss German is such a funny language. It is sometimes hard not to smile. It's maybe like the sound of their medieval life, chopping wood and clanging cowbells and the nasal toot of their Alp horns, and maybe rocks falling off the sides of their awesome mountains. This compared to the fluid birdsong of Arabic, it would be funny to have both in the same room at once, but we don't usually speak Arabic around them. We speak High German, Hochdeutsch, and they speak it back to us, slowly and clearly, with what I am told is a strong Swiss accent, but I don't hear that, it's the only High German I know. It was a tourist from Berlin who told me that. He said, in Berlin you would be taken for a Swiss woman, your German is that good but with a Swiss accent. If it weren't for the color of your skin, of course, you know what I mean. I agreed that I did, with a smile. So what we have now, I would say, is not money, very short, nor freedom, we are still registered as Ausländer, but dignity. And this is what I think everyone needs. After the basics of food and shelter that we need just as animals, first thing after that, dignity. Everyone needs and deserves this, just as part of being human. And yet this is a very undignified world. And so we struggle. You see how it is. And yes, dignity is something you get from other people, it's in their eyes, it's a kind of regard. If you don't get it, the anger rises in you. This I know very well. That anger can kill you. Those young men blowing things up, they're angry because they don't have dignity, which is something other people give you, so it's tricky. I mean, you have to deserve it, but ultimately it's something other people give you. So the angriest of our young men blow things up because they aren't given it, and mostly they blow up their own people's chances in this world. Take the Chinese. Chinese tourists who come and tell me, in English of course, that for a century they were oppressed by European countries, they were humiliated. They had no dignity anywhere on earth, even at home. But who can imagine that now? The Chinese are so powerful now, no one can criticize them. And they forced that to happen by standing up for themselves. They didn't do it by killing strangers at random. That is so wrong, I can't even express it. No, if it's going to happen, it has to be done like the Chinese did it. Possibly Arabia with its new regime will change, and the wars end and the rest of our suffering countries change in ways that force the rest of the world to give us the respect we deserve. It will take changes all around. It will take the young to do it. Meanwhile, we fill our restaurant night after night. We are legal permanent residents of Switzerland. The years here will pass faster than in the camp, that's for sure. That the boredom of the camp made time go slow, so that I must have lived a very long life by that protraction, is an irony that I don't find all that funny. Better to have it all go by in a tearing rush. That I am sure of. To get by here in this country, I've become a different person, and more than once. But this new person standing here now is not so bad. And there are things about the Swiss you have to admire. They are so punktlich, so punctual. This is funny at first, but what is it but a regard for the other person? You are saying to the other person, your time is as valuable as mine, so I will not waste yours by being late. Let us agree we are all equally important, and so everyone has to be on time, in order to respect each other. Once we had the restaurant reserved by a single group, we decided to do it on Monday, our usual night off, so as not to inconvenience any of our regulars. So we were cooking away, fixed menu, pretty easy but had to be done right, and my daughter looked out the door and laughed. Look, she said, the invitation is for 8, but some of them got here at 7:45, so they are waiting outside until it turns 8. Here, look at the clock, you'll see I'm right. And at 8 there was a knock on our door. We greeted them with huge smiles. I'm sure they thought we were a little tipsy. Then also in the train stations, this I like to watch, the clocks over the platform show the time, and whatever your train's departure time is, if you look out the window of the train right before, you'll see the conductor of the train also has his or her head out the window, looking at the clock, and when the clock hits the very minute and second of departure, the train jerks and off you go. That's the Swiss. These people will accept us if we aren't too many. If we are too many, they will get nervous, that's pretty clear. I think it's the same in Hungary or in any of these little European countries. They're prosperous, yes, but there are only a few million of them in each country. 7 million Swiss, I think, and 3 million Ausländer among them. That's a lot. And it's not just the sense of the nation but the language. This, I think, is the crux. Say, only 5 million people on Earth speak your language. That's already far less than many cities hold. Then another 5 million come to live with you, and everyone speaks English to understand each other. Pretty soon your kids speak English, pretty soon everyone speaks English, and then your language is gone. That would be a big loss, a crushing loss.
So people get protective of that.
The most important thing, therefore, is to learn the language. Not just English, but the local language, the native language. The mother tongue. Their culture doesn't matter so much, just the language. That I find is the great connector. You speak their language, and even when you're messing it up like crazy, they get a look on their face. In that moment, they want to help you. They see you are human, also that their language is a hard one, a strange one. But you've taken the trouble.
The Swiss are very good about that.
Their language classes are free, and besides they have 4 languages among themselves, which they hack to bits with each other every day. Take the tunnel under the mountain from this town to the town at the other end of the tunnel, and they don't speak the same language they speak here. You go from weird German to weird French, and really, we speak German better than many Swiss who live just 20 kilometers from here. It makes them more tolerant, maybe. They joke about each other in that regard. When everyone jokes like the Swiss do about each other, when everyone in the world has their dignity, we will be all right. In the meantime, here I am, an old woman. My life mostly lived in refugee camps, out on the street outside our little restaurant, Early sunset, as always here, in the shade at 3 p.m. It's a shady town so deep in its hole, a calm town, a sleepy town. Whatever happened in the past, whatever happens after this, today is today. In a little while I'll go back inside. Chapter 106. The day before Fastnacht, Mary got a message from Arthur Nolan. He was getting back to Zurich in time for it. Could he still join her? Yes, she messaged back. The rest of that day she thought about him, wondered what it meant that he was back. She was pleased he would be there. Had he cut short a tour? She went out to see the clipper of the clouds descend onto the big new airship Flughafen in Dubendorf. When he emerged from their little jetway, he saw her and smiled. A slight man. She accompanied him to his co-op, looked around curiously as he put away his small bag of stuff. Frank's last place. Who remembered him now? Seemed like it might already be down to her. Maybe his parents were still alive. If so, they would be so sad. Horrible the way mental illness spread its pain around, cut people off. Her Frank, she had done her best. And he had been a friend anyway. She had loved him in her way. Nothing to be done. They trammed up to her place, and he laughed to see it. You took a place size for me, he joked as he walked down the length it, farther to the left than she could have gone. They dined in a nearby trattoria. Art told her where he had gone on his last trip. Central Asia, mostly, circling the lower slopes of the various mountain ranges, where animals were doing very well. The Caucasus, the Pamirs, the Karakorums, the Altai, the Hindu Kush, the Himalaya. There was a Lenin Peak in the Pamirs, and Tajikistan was almost all a wilderness reserve, imperfect but real. They had seen a snow leopard and black-faced langurs and many other creatures. People had inhabited these mountain ranges for thousands of years, but the nature of the land meant it was a bit like Switzerland. Only more so. Some terrain was just too wild to make much of. His friends Tobias and Jesse were helping to create what they called the Anthropocene Wilderness, a composite thing that was like the wilder wing of the half-Earth movement, and many of the governments there were cooperating in creating a vast integrated park and corridor system that included and supported the local indigenous human populations as park keepers or simply local residents, part of the land doing their thing. It sounds great, Mary said. I'd like to go on that one. Would you? Because I'm going to do it again. If I go, I'd like to spend more time on the ground, she confessed. Just stay in one place for a while, see what happens. We could drop you off and pick you up again. That sounds good. After dinner, he gave her another hug and headed off to the tram. The next day was Fastnacht in Zurich. Shrove Tuesday, falling on February 14th of this year. Art came up to her place to meet her, and when she opened the door, she found him wearing a silver lame jumpsuit with a plastic red hat. You're going to freeze in that, she warned him. She herself had on a long black cape and carried a Venetian domino she could put on when she wanted, a beautiful cat face, which restricted her vision too much to keep on all the time, but looked nice. She put it on to show him, and he said, "Oh, I love cats." "I know you do," she said. "Do you want to borrow a coat? I'll be all right." They went out into the darkness of early evening. As so often, Fastnacht was going to be cold. On this night the air was particularly chill, temperature already well below freezing. This had a peculiar effect on the festival, because many Zurchers were like Art, dressed in costumes not really appropriate for such cold. But the Swiss were pretty cold-hardened people, and apparently Art was too. As they walked down Ramesstrasse arm in arm, they saw people in grass skirts, Hawaiian short-sleeve shirts, bikinis and the like. Also fur coats, band uniforms, national costumes from many nations, and every possible type of kitschy cantonal costume. And almost every person out there promenading carried a musical instrument. Fastnacht in Zurich was a musical evening. On every street corner, one or more musical groups were playing for small crowds surrounding them. For a while Mary and Art listened to a steel drum band banging away metallically at some sprightly tune from Trinidad. Right behind the band, a fountain was gushing into the air, its water plashing down in time to the music. Bulbous ice knuckles made a thick white verge around the edges of the fountain's basin. Lower on Ramesstrasse, they strolled slowly by the luxury shops, looking at window displays. The shop that sold alpine curiosities held them for a long time. Polished facets of stone, geodes, burls, and cubes of wood, all enlivened by a small menagerie of stuffed alpine animals. Also fur pelts, stretched out like artworks against the walls to right and left. Art stuck his nose to the glass to see better. "What are they?" Mary asked. "I'm not sure. I mean, the stuffed ones are easy, that's a fox and a weasel. I'm not really sure about the pelts though. Kind of sad, no? I don't know, once they're dead, I think stuffing some of them is okay. And keeping their fur. Once I came on a dead owl that was perfectly intact, a huge thing, and I took it to a taxidermist and had it stuffed. It was beautiful. I had it for years. What happened to it? I don't know, I was about 10. Down the street to the next corner, where an Andean band in serapes played their panpipes and guitars. They at least were appropriately dressed for the cold. They sang in tight harmonies, not in Spanish. Maybe it was Quechua. These were professionals, or at least professional street musicians, and Mary and Art stayed and listened for a long time, so long that Mary got cold and steered Art down into the Niederdorf. Here they found that Zurich had put its lions out for the evening, a fact which caused Art to exclaim happily, time after time, as they passed the little prides. Mary told Art what she knew about them, which she had just read in the paper the week before. They were fiberglass lions, life-sized, molded in 10 or a dozen different postures, then painted different colors by different groups, and placed all over the city to celebrate its 2000th anniversary, back in 1987. Turicum, Art interjected, a Roman city. Mary agreed. After the city's year-long celebration of its 2000th year, she went on, most of the lions had been auctioned off, but the city had kept 100 or 2 in storage at one of the bus garages, ready to be redeployed, and this year's Fastnacht had been declared special for some reason or other. So now they passed lions painted like alpine meadows, like flames, like the blue and white Zurich flag, like tram tickets and zebras and sea serpents and the British flag. They booted, like Art Deco lamps or granite or brick, and as for their various postures, Art identified most of them to Mary as they passed them. That's couchant, that's rampant, that one's a saltant, that one's a gaze, that one's a coal. That head is cabochon, if you can believe it. You liked heraldry as a child, Mary guessed. I did. It was all about animals, it seemed to me. Did you read Gerald Durrell? I loved Gerald Durrell. That one's passant, the one next to it is trippant, this one is salient. She steered him toward the Casa Bar. As they approached it, he laughed aloud at a group of lions outside its door, painted in uniforms of some psychedelic Sgt. Pepper kind. He said, "Do you know Fourier, Charles Fourier, the French utopian?" "No," Mary said.
Tell me.
He was a utopian. He had followers in France and America. They started communes based on his ideas, and in his books he went into great detail about everything. Verne loved his work. He's a kind of secret influence on Verne. And for him the animals were very important. They were going to join us, he said, and become a big part of civilization. So at one point he says, "The mail will be delivered by lions." By lions? Mary exclaimed. That's right. The mail will be delivered by lions. She laughed with him. They staggered down an alleyway laughing helplessly. "I'd like to see that," she said. "I'm looking forward to that one." They crashed into the Casa Bar still laughing. "The drinks will be served by kangaroos," Mary predicted. The usual house band was playing traditional jazz. The star of this band was the clarinet player, fluid and long-winded beyond human belief. They drank Irish coffees as they listened, and prodded by Mary, Art told her more about his animalist youth. It turned out they had grown up about 100 miles apart, but he had been a country boy in summer, a child of County Down, and Ireland's back country still supported a fair population of small wild creatures, all hounded relentlessly by the young Art, it sounded like. They downed the last of their coffees and went back out into the night. As they threaded the crowded dark alleys, it sounded like someone was playing an organ in the Grossmünster, but as they chased the sound they found it was coming from a single accordion player, sitting on a gold lion in a concrete and glass box on the Western River Walk. Box toccata and fugue in D minor, in fact, all coming from a single man squeezing his big black box in and out, and fingering fast. Perfect pacing, articulation, volume. Mary had never heard any orchestra finish it so well. Afterward, Art approached with a few other listeners to find out who this virtuoso was. while Mary stayed outside the box to listen to the general cacophony. A Russian, Art reported to Mary when he returned, due to play the next night in Tunhali. Just passing the time tonight, not even rehearsing, just joining the party. He had played in subway stations in Moscow when he was young and still liked it.
So he had said.
To make such beauty out of a silly squeeze box. Mary marveled. Anything is possible on Fastnacht, Art said. Let's go find the Geoengineering. I like those bands. Geoengineering? You know, brass bands. They're mostly school band reunions, and they play really loudly and out of tune. On purpose?
Yes.
It's a Swiss thing, I think. On festival night you're supposed to go wild. So for them that means playing your French horn out of tune. Again they laughed. They crossed the Limmat on the Munsterbrook into the little old streets between the river and Bahnhofstrasse. The candy store was open for Fastnacht, and Mary treated Art to a slice of dried orange half-dipped in dark chocolate. Bands were playing on every corner. A quintet of saxes, some West African pop, a tango ensemble blazing through some piazzolla. Finally, they found the Geoengineering, which was indeed brass bands playing loudly and out of tune, all at once different tunes. All a mix and a roar, the Zurchers costumed and flush-faced in the frigid air. It was cold. A choir of alpenhorn players blew into alpenhorns of different lengths, making them more versatile in terms of tones, so that Copland's fanfare for the common man sounded very fine. The final movement of Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata, on the other hand, proved to be a bridge too far when adapted for alphorn, Geoengineering indeed, to the point of falling apart into a giant blaring of all the alphorns at once. The crowd cheered and dispersed, Mary and Art among them. After a few more stops to listen to other groups, they took refuge in the Zughhauskeller and ordered creme brulee and coffee fertig. I like the mix of caffeine and alcohol, Mary confessed. He nodded. I like the warmth. A group of men dressed as American cheerleaders burst into the big room and leaped up onto the tables. The band accompanying them was Swiss traditional, and yet with the cheerleaders on the tables they began to play marching songs from America. John Philip, Susan no doubt. On the Swiss instruments this didn't work very well, nor did the men in drag manage to coordinate their cancan dancing with any precision, but everyone cheered them anyway. It was Geoengineering again, with Geogendance too, mustached bankers in pleated skirts and cashmere sweaters, arm in arm, high-kicking precariously overhead. It was too ludicrous not to cheer. Art shouted in Mary's ear that all this was sign of a syndrome, that when an orderly culture like Switzerland finally let loose it was inevitably even wilder than more relaxed cultures. It's a matter of venting, he said loudly, so she could hear him. Lots of pressure through a small aperture, kind of thing. Like a French horn mouthpiece, Mary joked. Yes, exactly. I'm like that myself, Mary shouted. She didn't know why. Art grinned. Me too. Let's get out of here before someone gets hurt, Mary said. They wandered on the crowded streets. From the town hall's open doors they could hear the city's orchestra charging through the end of Brahms's Second Symphony, trombones leading the way. Brahms's own Geoengineering, the best of all. After that the orchestra was going to do the finale of Beethoven's Fifth. It wasn't a night to be subtle. At midnight there would be fireworks over the lake. How will people get home after the fireworks? Mary wondered. The trams stop at midnight no matter what day it is. We can walk up to your place, right? Yes, sure. I'd like that. Work off some energy. And warm up a little. So they made their way slowly through the streets and alleys toward the lake. A string quartet was screeching out something by Ligeti, or maybe it was Stockhausen, transfixing a crowd around them, except for the people singing along with it or shouting abuse. A passing clown gave Mary and Art slide whistles, her small and high, his bigger and lower, and Art made her stop by a pair of green and orange lions, Assurgent Affronti, Art said, and in the colors of the Irish flag, so they could stand on one and become their own band, him leading her through Raglan Road. The Gaelic name for the tune, Art told her before they started, meant dawning of the day. Very apt, she replied, trying to focus on the music. Slide whistles were simple but hard, as she was now remembering from her childhood. Every micrometer up or down the slide changed the tone considerably. It was impossible to hit the notes right. One had to adjust mid-note with minute adjustments, So it was Guggen music again for sure. Possibly it was the same for trombones, which was why they liked to play out of tune on this night, being out of practice, and thus making a virtue of necessity. But Art could carry a tune on his bigger whistle, and she did her best, and some people stopped to listen. Mary saw all of a sudden that they had stopped because no one on this night was to be allowed to play without an audience. This was so touching that Mary almost cried. She blew hard into her little whistle and squealed a looping descant that almost worked. Guggen music indeed. Sloppy Irish song. The anthem of St. Patrick's Day. On Raglan Road in November, I saw her first and knew. When they finished, she took Art by the arm and dragged him off, saying, "Come on, we'll be puncturing their eardrums with these things." He only laughed. Many of the corner bands were also school reunions, people pulling instruments and jackets out of the closet, happy to be immersed in their mates and their old songs. The Swiss never gave up on music, Art shouted. Everyone still learns to play something in school, and even if they stop doing it afterward, tonight's the night. Mary nodded as she looked around. People were red-faced and ecstatic with the joy of playing music together. Playing. Music was adults at play. The sound spheres in this part of the city overlapped, but as long as that didn't confuse the players, or even if it did, the listeners took it as part of the experience. Down near the lake it got more and more crowded. It was the place to be, and here they could always hear at least 3 tunes at once, often more. Cacophony, she shouted to Art. Polyphony, he shouted back, grinning. Mary nodded, smiling back at him. Midnight was approaching. Ash Wednesday would soon be here, with its discipline and fasting. It was time to let loose. Fat Tuesday. Even more than New Year's Eve, it was time to let loose. Winter's end was in sight, and though it wasn't spring, it was the promise of spring. Spring would come. That knowledge was always the real festival night. They reached the lake. The Zurich Sea, her summer schwimmbad. Mary recalled the big conference in Kongresshalle just down the shore, the clot of trends, the Gordian knot of the world, but then she thought, no, not tonight. She had spent her entire life tugging on that Gordian knot, and at most had only loosened a snag, the big knot remaining intact despite a lifetime of ceaseless work. She shuddered in the cold at the thought of that, grabbed Art's arm, guided him to the little lakeside park with the statue of Ganymede and the eagle. "Have you seen this before?" she asked him. "The statue? Sure. But who is Ganymede? I never really knew. And what's with the bird?" She said, "It's kind of mysterious, really. It's said to be Ganymede and Zeus, Zeus in the form of an eagle. So, but look at him. What is he saying to that eagle, do you think? What does it mean? What does it mean?" Art regarded it. Naked bronze man, arms outstretched, neatly balanced, one arm back and high, the other forward and low, as if offering something to the bird, as in falconry. But the eagle was almost waist-high to him. "That's a really big bird," Art said. "And there's something wrong with its wings." "A phoenix," Mary said, as it occurred to her. "Maybe it's a phoenix. The man is offering it his life," Art guessed. Mary stared at it. "I don't know," she confessed. "I can't get it." "It's some kind of offering," Art insisted. "It's a gesture of offering. He's us, right? So he's us, offering the world back to the animals." "Maybe so. He was definitely saying something. That we could become something magnificent, or, at least interesting. That we began, as we still are now, child geniuses. That there is no other home for us than here. That we will cope no matter how stupid things get. That all couples are odd couples. That the only catastrophe that can't be undone is extinction. That we can make a good place. That people can take their fate in their hands. That there is no such thing as fate." Her lake extended blackly to the low hills in the distance, the Vorder Alps, the Forward Alps. Black sky above, spangled with stars. Orion, the winter god, looking like a starry version of the Ganymede before them.
"It has to mean something," Mary said. "Does it?"
Art asked. "I think it does." "That's Jupiter there to the west," Art said, pointing to the brightest star. "So, if your big bird is Zeus, that's where he comes from, right?" "Maybe so," Mary said. She tried to put that together with the burbling roar of the crowd, the overlapping music, the lake and the sky. It was too big. She tried to take it in anyway, feeling the world balloon inside her, Oceans of clouds in her chest, this town, these people, this friend, the Alps, the future. All too much. She clutched his arm hard. We will keep going, she said to him in her head, to everyone she knew or had ever known, all those people so tangled inside her, living or dead. We will keep going, she reassured them all, but mostly herself, if she could. We will keep going, because there is no such thing as fate. Because we never really come to the end.